Now I'm going to turn the program over to Leslie, who is going to talk about another very fascinating aspect of Anishinaabe basket work. So Leslie?
Good evening. Thank you for coming, either virtually or in person. And thanks to Leslie and Donna for inviting me to speak on this subject. 10 years ago, I had the privilege of working as a consulting archivist for the Little Traverse Bay Band of Odawa Indians in Harbor Springs. This fueled an interest I already had in Anishinaabek in the community, as my family has a summer home in Goodhart near Cross Village in Emmett County. As an archivist, my goal tonight is to share with you some information that I've discovered and researched, and give you an overview of the government program, the WPA, the Works Progress Administration, and the Michigan Indian Handicraft Project that ran from 1938 to 1942. So for over 100, first I'd like to present a little historical context, and you'll see that for centuries, before the start of the WPA program, Indian handicrafts were being made and sold all over the state, and also even in Europe. For over 150 years, Michigan Indians relied on the sale of handicrafts to generate income, sometimes the only source for their families. These crafts were made from readily sourced materials on both private and public lands. They were then sold to earn needed cash, especially during the late 19th and early 20th centuries. Historically, the Anishinaabek had access to millions of acres of land in the Great Lakes, but logging, settlement, and treaties diminished the availability of resources to them. During the 19th century, missionaries encouraged Indians to continue producing their handicrafts and their traditions, as they had found a market in Europe. In fact, Bishop Frederick Baraga, who was a Catholic priest, missionary, linguist, he worked in the Great Lakes from 1831 until his death in 1868. And he kept missions in what is now known as Harbor Springs, Sault Ste. Marie, and Marquette. In traveling these circuits, he collected and amassed a huge collection of native arts and crafts, and they're now housed in the Slovene Ethnographic Museum. A local crafts market in northern Michigan was developed by Indian businessmen in the late 1870s. This slide shows Ignatius of Petoskey and his sons in front of their store that the son Basil Petoskey started, and they sold Indian curiosities and crafts that were made by family and friends. It was the first Indian craft shop in Petoskey and probably in Emmett County. Anishinaabek women had manufactured birch bark boxes and baskets for sale to travelers passing through Mackinac Island. So they set up blankets by ferries and train depots, laid their wares out, and sold them to tourists who came through Mackinac Island. Okay, sorry about that. During the 1890s, the village of the Burt Lake Band of Odawa and Chippewa at Indian Point was known for its handmade crafts. Steamships on the inland waterway, you can see the map above, and it shows where Indian Point was. And the inland waterway comes through and goes from Sheboygan through to Little Traverse Bay. So these steamships would come and they would stop at Indian Point and buy the handmade crafts, and they'd spend part of the day in the village there. Postcards were also made showing Native Americans working their crafts or places where they may have lived or spent time. You can see here, these are artists in Harbor Springs circa 1906, and these postcards were sent home or sent to relatives or collected. to show what was going on to people who might not know. Tribal members sold their crafts at roadside stands, powwows, county fairs like this one, and historical reenactments. One such event was the summer program Hiawatha. It was held at Round Lake and from 1905 to 1915. The entire cast was composed of Anishinaabek actors. Grace Chandler Horn was one of the earliest Michigan photographers, female photographers. In 1907, she purchased a Petoskey photo studio and made and sold photographs of the Hiawatha event. You can see here one of her photos that was made into a postcard. And she also operated the Horn Art Shop. She was a painter, photographer, so she had many wares and ultimately published some of these. The Hiawatha event can be found in publications. In Leelanau County, families sold and bartered baskets and other crafts to store owners like Edward Miller, while other families sold door to door in resort communities. The basket maker on the right was known as Storm Cloud Woman. She sold her basket at Edward Miller's Traverse City drugstore. Miller, who was raised in nearby Presbyterian mission communities, learned to speak the native language and was a lifelong friend to Native Americans in the area. He had a reputation for kindness and good deeds with the Indian people. And they trusted him, so they traded with him, bought and sold goods with him, and the store became something of an Indian meeting place when they came to town. Another location, which is sort of near and dear to me, is in Goodhart. Lowell Lampkin in 1914 opened the Indian Art Store on Lakeshore Drive and sold the crafts of the Middle Village Indians to tourists there. This trade kept up until about 1938, when the WPA started its program in Cross Village. At that time, he then sold the shop to a woman named Charlotte Burton. She extensively remodeled it and then continued to sell Indian crafts and other items for many years. In Harbor Springs, Chief Joseph Etowagashik had a store. He opened an Indian curio shop at the foot of the old ferry building, the old ferry dock that catered, of course, to summer tourists. In 1921, he moved to a building at the foot of the Michigan Transit Dock, and in 1934 to a new location on State Street in Harbor Springs, and 2 generations of his family continued that store after him. I'm going to read a quote here from his grandson, Frank, who later recalled that, "Through the work they made to sell to my grandfather, community members gained only a meager supplement to their family income, though it provided food for the families. This was because customers, who were tourists, would pay very little, which they considered to be merely curios or souvenirs. A second, but no less important group of customers were the collectors looking for authentic work. So Joe shipped thousands of items wholesale to gift shops and museum stores across the country." This is an example of one of those roadside stands, a wigwam store north of St. Ignace. It was made of cedar poles, white birch bark and elm, and it was used by Indians to sell their baskets along the side of the road. A huge store, and some of you might know of it, is Tayson's, and it's in Mackinac City. It opened in 1926. They are still there. So they're celebrating their 100th anniversary this year. In a 1974 interview, Harbor Springs quillbox artist Susan Shiganabe stated that during the Depression, they had plenty of food but needed cash. So she and her husband started making quill boxes. They went to her mother's because she knew her mother had some porcupines hanging around and got some quills, and they started experimenting. And she said that at first, you know, they weren't very good, but as they practiced, they got better. She said, whenever we had any amount of them, meaning quill boxes, we gave them to Tyson's, but we didn't do too much business with them because they were pretty far away at that time. Tyson's only paid 25 cents to $1 per quill box, which was obviously next to nothing. But she said it would buy us what we needed. Susan became an eminent quill box artist, and she was Yvonne Walker-Keshik's mentor. It also became a place, you can see up above that there's several other buildings beside the store. And it became a place where other Native Americans would go and show people how to make their craft. So not only could they buy their crafts there, they could see it in action, so to speak. So there were many well-known basket weavers and quillbox artists in the northern counties. Catherine and Susan Bird were two of them. They lived in Sutton's Bay. They were listed on census records for over 20 years as being basket weavers. And in 1910, just to give you an idea, in Cross Village alone, on the census, there were 8 basket weavers and 34 making bark work, which would be the quill boxes. In 1910, that's a lot of people on the census with that occupation. Now, how much money they made from doing that, we don't really know. Or I don't know at this point, let's put it that way. Angeline Chippewa was a cousin of Marianne Mixamong, who you'll hear about in a little bit. She was born near Traverse City and moved to Cross Village in 1906. She and her cousin, Marianne, worked closely together and sometimes even worked on the same box. This quill box measures 8 inches by 9 inches, which is quite large for a quill box. One that's entirely, what? Oh, I didn't.
The Bird sisters, okay.
Sorry. Thank you. And the box is in the collection. It's at the Institute of Science, Cranbrook Institute of Science in the Marybelle Shirtliff collection. Marybelle Shirtliff, her father owned a store in Cross Village, which she then took over. She amassed a large collection. She sort of turned the store into a museum. She gave tours of the museum. And then when she retired, the collection started being dispersed. Some of it went to the Institute of Science. Okay. The WPA's Michigan Indian Handicrafts Project, also known as the MIHP. It originated in June of 1938, for the purpose of reviving, developing, and perpetuating the arts and crafts of Great Lakes Indians for economic rehabilitation. And that word rehabilitation is used often in these WPA records and in writings about them. So that's kind of an interesting thing to keep in mind. One major flaw of the program is that officials never consulted the Anishinaabek people about what their needs might be. So there's that. So Catherine Foley spearheaded the project. Catherine was born on Mackinac Island, raised in Kalamazoo as a child, and then spent most of her life in Petoskey. She worked first as a bookkeeper and then became an administrator for the Civil Works Administration. This agency morphed into the Emmett County Emergency Relief Administration, or ERA, which many of the counties up north had. I don't know how many down here because I haven't looked into that. The goal of these county agencies were to give unemployed men work on various infrastructure projects. Foley was a go-getter, no doubt about it. She clearly cared about her community, and especially from the perspective of social work and relief for the needy. She was described as energetic, efficient, and dynamic. In a 1943 interview, She explained how the project came to her when she was in charge of relief work in Emmett County. She wanted to help Michigan Indians find a solution to their own economic problems by reviving Native arts and crafts. I'm always interested, or I have been interested when I continue to read the word revive, because I don't think that those craft traditions ever went away. So what was the revival actually about? Maybe, and especially during the Depression, I think that there was not a lot of buying and selling going on because it was the Depression. And the elders in the community obviously knew more than the young people. Maybe some of the young people moved away to get work or whatever. So maybe that's what it refers to. At any rate, Foley's role was to promote, initiate, coordinate, supervise, and conduct the activities. She had assistance from local district supervisors, especially those in the ERA. And in her first report, she described the project with 4 points: provide employment for qualified Indians, assemble, prepare, circulate, and maintain exhibitions, operate experimental arts and crafts centers in cooperation with Indian communities, and teach and conduct lectures and demonstrations in Indian arts and crafts. She organized the project into geographical units. The first workshop was set up in Cross Village in June of 1938. During the summer months, raw materials were gathered, including birch bark and sweetgrass, and white cedar roots were dug up from the bluffs and sand dunes near Cross Village, one of the few places where they could be found. Groups in Pellston and Bayshore in Charlevoix County worked on gathering basswood. And in the fall, black ash was harvested and groups at Mackinac and Sugar Island were established. To train new workers, Foley hired experienced artists, especially the older women. So Alice Marriott comes on the scene. This is an interesting little sidebar that the project obviously received national attention. Alice lived in Oklahoma. She served as the Oklahoma field representative for the Indian Arts and Crafts Board, known as the IACB. And she traveled all around. She was mostly in the West, traveling around, seeing what was happening with communities there. The ICAB was a U.S. Department of Interior program, and it was designed to revitalize Native economies through their production and marketing of American Indian arts. So this sort of is very similar to what the Michigan project was doing. So she started a project similar to ours with co-sponsorship of the ICAB in March of 1939. So that date's important. She visited Michigan and Wisconsin in January of 1940, but only went as far as Marquette, so she never got to meet Catherine Foley. That would have been a really interesting conversation, I think. I would like to have been in the room for that one. Because while Alice Marriott viewed the Michigan project as experimental, it sure seems to me that the one in Oklahoma was modeled after the one in Michigan, and it started almost a year later. So there's that. So make what you will of that one. So Foley's first task was to enlist the co-sponsorship of the Department of Conservation. This was crucial, especially in Michigan, because it provided access to raw materials on state land without harassment from conservation officers. And in fact, officers often accompanied the Indians onto the land because they might know where certain trees could be harvested, etc. It was a temporary respite, though, let's say. And the benefit to the conservation department, one thing they thought, okay, we'll get involved, was because they ended up receiving many of the objects that were constructed by workers in this program. I'm just talking about basket weaving, but other things like rustic furniture, snowshoes, and other objects were created by Michigan handicraft workers. The conservation department then received these and furnished many of the buildings that are in our state parks. And even today, some can still be found. Some of that rustic wood furniture can still be found. And then there were also some crafts that were available for educational programming. You can see here too what the cost that the conservation department was giving these objects and how many was being harvested, how many were being harvested each month during the process. And there's a different sheet for that's much smaller for the UP. This is a sheet from the plan of operation from 1940, and it's for black ash baskets. And you can see, I can't read it on my screen, so I'm going to look back. How it goes step by step, what the plan was. And there's a different one for each type of work. Quill baskets has one, rustic furniture has one, snowshoes has one. So first they go into the field and gather the materials. And then they're prepared as followed, pounding, subdividing layers, scraping of layers, and then dyed. Some of them are dyed by boiling, et cetera, et cetera. And then down at the bottom, number 8, the baskets are then turned over to sponsor for release to be used in schools and other institutions and for display. So then the Department of Conservation would take some of these, since they were the co-sponsor. So I'm going to show you some images now, many of them from the Little Traverse Bay Band of Ottawa archives. Here's the process. So this is for basswood. It was painstaking work, and it took many hours to get the materials ready for work. First the logs, well, first you harvest the logs, then they had to be pounded with a blunt object. You can see the axe, and at the top, the gentleman at the, do I have the right one? Yeah, the gentleman at the top is using the blunt end to help soften and also to loosen but not bruise the fibers. Black ash grows in wet, swampy areas. It's best to harvest in the spring when the sap is running so that they don't need to be soaked in water for as long to soften. Then the branches have to have the right amount of give, not too soft, not too hard. And then you can see that other step that was on there was peeling the layers back. So you loosen the layers, peel the layers back. Here's some fiber or some layers being dried after being soaked. And this woman is scraping them into thinner fibers that could be used either for weaving or for sewing. So once the materials were prepped, then the baskets could be made. These are WPA workers, 1939 in Bayshore, which was in Charlevoix County. It's also, it's near Burgess, so sometimes it's called Burgess also. After the baskets were completed, they were sent to Petoskey. Even though the initial project workshop was in Cross Village, it wasn't as large as the one in Petoskey. They had a second floor in Petoskey. And of course, Catherine Foley lived in Petoskey. So they were sent there where they were labeled and cataloged with the maker's name and the amount of time it took to make them. Now, once these baskets and quill boxes left, did that information go with? Maybe in some cases it did, and probably in most cases it didn't. There are lots of objects, for example, in the Institute of Science that say WPA. We don't even know who the maker was. Another woman weaving black ash baskets. And a gentleman weaving black ash. Usually the men weren't the weavers, but this particular man, he didn't have, he wasn't paralyzed, but he had trouble with his legs. So he wasn't able to do some of the other work. And that is a big hamper. So this is a contemporary photo of what is known as the Cross Village Town Hall. It's where the workshop was. You can see the photo to the right is the inside of the workshop. I have been in this building. It is still in use today for book sales and things like that, not for workshops. But, all right. So Mary Ann Mixamong, who I mentioned before, she was the first manager and safety foreman of the Cross Village Workshop. She was originally from Proshabastown, which is near Sutton's Bay, and was well known and highly skilled as a quill box artist. While she thought she was too old to be involved in this project and work on this project, others later spoke of her exuberance during the short year that she was involved, because she passed away in January of 1939. Now, I don't know who succeeded her as manager. This particular quill box is in the Institute of Science. You can see it's also in that photograph. She received $2.75 for it. So, not much to live on. Here are three women working in the workshop from the newspaper article. Mary Kiagama, she was Yvonne Walker-Keshik's grandmother and reputedly one of the finest quill workers of the early 20th century. And Anna, I won't say right, a demon. She was her great aunt, was Yvonne's great aunt, and one of the most well-known of the MIHP artists. And in fact, many of the photos are of Anna. You'll see some more in a few minutes. I guess she was photogenic, and she was also willing to go out and show her skills. This is one of the only images I could find of the Sugar Island group in the UP, and it was published in this 1939 article. You can clearly see the attitudes of the era based on the language used in the article. And I will say this, that George Laurie, who was a local project sponsor for Indian work in Chippewa and Mackinac counties, stated that he was hopeful that this work will help make the Anishinaabek self-supporting and no longer a white man's burden. While he was initially hesitant to ask men to do menial work, he soon discovered that men had nimble fingers and were quick to learn. Okay, so one of the important aspects of Catherine's work was marketing. It was one of the target objectives. Because Michigan had such a tourist community, that was one of her selling points, and this would be a good place because there was going to be all this tourists, and we could sell all these crafts, and it would grow and grow, and the Indians could become self-supporting. While there were displays of Indian crafts from personal connections prior to this time period, Catherine worked really hard to promote and find markets that might be amenable to selling the arts and crafts. She spoke at churches and to different organizations. She traveled to all 8 of the project areas to oversee production and collect objects for displays. And then she arranged the exhibits. So exhibits were held in various locations, like the National Wildlife Conference, at Kern's department store in Detroit. And there's Anna again. And here's a Sugar Island handicraft display at Hub Department Store, which is great. I love this photo because it has the sign in it. It's clear what it is. And you can see some of the other objects that were created through the program. And here's another one of Anna a couple years later. Now she's at a Mackinac Island festival and she's showing how she makes her quill boxes. So what were the outcomes of the project? First, MIHP workers were paid subsistence level salaries, 50 cents an hour for a 20-hour work week. And this was hardly enough for a family to survive on. Secondly, the stated goal of that was established was economic self-sufficiency. It was never achieved. Foley took the objects and they were never seen again. Some were dispersed through the conservation department, some to museums and schools for educational purposes, but what happened to the rest? Perhaps they ended up in personal and private collections. Many people wondered if they were sold and who bought them, and if so, for how much. Additionally, the Anishinaabek were not hired for positions of authority. So they weren't taught about supply and demand, how to fix costs, etc., in order to become self-supporting. There were no weekly production quotas. While the project provided incentive for a new generation of artists to be trained in these crafts, and the project was well-intentioned, it failed to result in economic independence, especially since once the WPA was terminated in 1942, the project ended because there was no external funding. And a final problem that discouraged many Michigan Indians from continuing to practice the arts was the loss of access to natural materials. Now the conservation department took the land back and were patrolling the land, so they didn't have access to materials that were on state lands, like black ash, for example, or birch bark. However, the project did offer opportunities for artists to have access to these materials for that limited time period, which was difficult economically just after or pre-war. So, well, this quote is from Maxwell Field. He's the archivist at the Little Traverse Bay Band of Odawa Indian Archives. He said he didn't believe that high production was expected to continue after the project ended. It doesn't diminish the fact that that Odawa were creating these items during that time period, and the process methods were revitalized and relearned for those that never knew about them. I'm giving you a few different perspectives here in these final quotes, so you can make your own judgment on what you think. This is a quote from a WPA supervisor who lived in Levering. His name was Leo Cameron. The coming of WPA to Cross Village not only brought employment to many, but a revival of many of the fading arts and a respect for the white man's laws of conservation, because that was important. Sorry. You should have said that. And finally, some quotes from Frank. There's a publication that you can read where he has quite a lot to say about his father's business and his life. The tourist trade helped to preserve many traditional crafts just as they were in danger of being lost. More importantly, the trade provided revenue in the wake of Ottawa land loss. The tourist market served by my father's business and others like his was instrumental in keeping people working in the art form, quill boxes, while the art world was becoming more sophisticated in its appreciation of American Indian art. And I think that alone is very interesting because it says something to what his grandfather was doing in the 1920s and shipping art across the country to museum gift shops and other stores around the country. So I leave you with that to make your own determination on if this was a successful four-year program. what came of it, and the fact that you know, things were happening way before this program and things are happening way after it. So I think we're in a good place now, especially with what the museum's doing and bringing Yvonne here, et cetera. And so I'll just do my thank you page and thank you.
If there are any questions for Leslie, if there are, would you repeat the question so it's recorded? Does anyone have any comments or questions?
So Yvonne, does she have any of her works at the DIA at the Anishinaabek exhibit there?
Donna knows more about
Could
that.
you repeat the question?
Oh, sorry. Does Yvonne Walker-Kishik have any works at the DIA?
Yes, there is an exhibit right now going on at the DIA through April, so you have to get there soon. She has several of her works along with her daughter, Damon, and her son. But if you come to the Birmingham Museum, we have several of her works as well, including one of her really well-known works, the Gravity Motion in co-work. So you can come by and see some of her and her daughter's work at the Birmingham Museum as well.
Would you say that for the record? Just
About which part? About the exhibit at the DIA? Yes.
Some museums, we also have stuff there.
Yes, okay, so yes, you can see Yvonne Walker-Kishik's, some of her pieces at the exhibit that's currently at the DAA through April, is that correct? And the Birmingham Museum also has some in their collection. And I'm not sure that Cranbrook has any in theirs.
They're not in our collection, they're being loaned to us by.
Oh, okay, so the collection of Yvonne's work that's at the Birmingham Museum is being loaned by Michigan State University Museum for their exhibit. So come see their exhibit.
Anybody else have questions or comments? It doesn't mind if Leslie repeats that.
Okay, oh, yes.
I know, it's your question. The dollar in 1940 would be, I looked it up,
Oh, okay.
is equivalent to $23.23. But my concern more is these people worked on these projects to increase their income, and it seems that it's the same thing that's been going on for centuries. The stuff was taken, they got pennies, and nothing was done to protect them. They weren't given the courtesy. I mean, the one poster you had up there said encouraged by white men.
Yes. So the comment was the value of the dollar that in 1940 is about $23 today. And that the same thing is happening now that happened then, is that they're not being paid the value. I mean, I think that's in a general sense, not specific to Anishinaabek artwork, you know, you never get paid what time is put into it. Like there's no hourly rate for working on an object, and how do you put a cost on it? And maybe, I mean, I agree with what you said. There are a couple of questions I see. Somebody was curious about the quills. How did they catch the porcupines? That's a really good question for Yvonne. I know I saw Yvonne, I went to a lecture that Yvonne gave many years ago, and I know that she will tell that story of how they harvested porcupines. And I know from reading Susan Shiganabe's interview that, you know, they would catch them in the woods. Some were roadkill, and they'd bring them home if they found them on the road or in the woods. Some they caught in the woods and we would bring them home and harvest them at home but that's a question for Yvonne. I don't, for Donna.
Today it's almost exclusively roadkill. And there is a network, so, a lot of different, tribes work together. If they spot something, they have you can call, anybody, can call the, tribal, the closest tribal, like their DNR, they have a Department of Natural
Right.
Resources for the tribe. And they'll contact whoever's closest to go pick it up so that they can, harvest, the animal before it gets too bad.
Okay, for those of you on Zoom, Donna said that today it's primarily roadkill and that there are tribal organizations and DNR groups, so to speak, within the tribes, and they will, if they find something, they'll contact each other and share information for whoever might be needing the quills. And then somebody else said the portions of the baskets that were dyed, what kind of dye, what colors? That's a good question, and I didn't research it, so I can't answer that today, but apparently Donna can answer that as well.
So chemical dyes, started to become more popular in the late 19th century. By the 20th century, commercial dyes were used. One of the most popular ones today is the Ritz that you can buy at Michael's. However, there is a
Resurgence
of using natural dyes, like using the plant dyes that would have been, that still are around today, like, black walnut, those shells.
Yeah. So the answer for the dyes, is twofold, is that commercial dyes were available and also using natural dyes, and natural dyes are coming back now. I do recall reading something about that, about gathering herbs and things of that nature for the dyeing process. And one thing I didn't mention, which I would like to mention, is that the design work, the design for the baskets and the quill boxes. Apparently Catherine Foley had some suggestion on what she thought might be sellable. So while she said, oh, you can use your own designs, if you know anything about Native communities, they have a relationship with their design work. It means something to them. So the fact that some of this was as sort of taken away in a sense is kind of an interesting thing to look at too. I mean, somebody could really do, hey, Donna, that's your next project. You could research, all of the iconography and all these baskets and see what was true or not true. Anyway, okay, I think that's it for questions online, and thank you all for coming.